Hello guys and welcome for another Eternum video. Today I will show you all of the perks that we can acquire on our armor pieces, and I believe that I can give you a good perception of what you should value more and what you should value less, and in this way you can clean your inventory and also you can recognize which items can have potential for abyss and which not. Now, of course, for the returning and the new players, it might be seem quite hard because there is so many perks, so many options, and of course the combinations are probably endless, but I will try to summarize it as much as I can so you can understand the whole concept. Starting off with the first type of perks that we have, those are the locked in perks, which are the new ones in Season 10. And in this case, we have the Lifestealer's Draw, the Sacrificial Empowerment, Terminal Vengeance, Prolonged Favor, Freeing Aggression, Quick Revive, Purifying Switch, and Breaker's Bypass. Now again, those are perks that can only acquire on armor, and we are not speaking about the jewelries or the weapons. We are just speaking about the armor pieces. So those are all the new perks that we can acquire on our armors, but we also have a lot of perks and charms, for which I will explain in a second the difference, that we can still slot in our gear pieces. Now the easiest way to find all of them at once is of course to use the New World database site, and here for example if I type Cloud Gloves, we can see all the different recipes. We need to find the one at 730 gear score. As you can see, we already have the armor set. And then I can go to perk buckets and I can see under it which are the potential rows for this type of item. Now, of course, at first you would have a lot of weapon perks because this is all the perks for the weapons, but then some other ones will start to pop in. For example, wellness, purifying toast, potent energy, and so on. Those perks, as you can see, if we hover over them, we will see that they have a charm. The craft mode in this case is a grit ward charm. The enchanted ward has a charm, and so on. This means that they are charms and they can be replaced or reslotted each and every time we want to, as long as we have the proper slot for them, meaning the defensive, offensive, or a skilled slot. Now, if we scroll even further, we will find a lot of other perks, which are, of course, the old ones, like we like to call them currently. And for them, we have different values simply because they have a perk mode, and the actual perk mode previously was used for crafting. Now this means that if we go to the crafting station and we want to force a specific perk, we can put the old craft mode and we can create the item with that perk. Now I'm not entirely sure if this will remain in the game for too long, but there are quite a lot of perks which have different values. Because for example, the enchanted ward with the old value has 3.5% protection, while the new one has only 2%. Of course, we don't know if AGS will remove them. They already said that they are working on it and they have a solution, but so far we don't have further details. But apart from that, this is how you can recognize what is possible to be rolled on your item, meaning that you can force it with a craft, or you can obtain it by luck, by obtaining it from the drop or from an elite chest or something like that, and what can be replaced and reused as many times as you want at a later stage, and those would be the charms. This is basically the difference between perks and charms. The perks cannot be reslotted or cannot be removed, while the charms can. Now, of course, we have different types of charms, like I said, but first I want to start with the new perks, because in my opinion, they are really common. They are appearing almost on every drop that we get, and many people, like I said, are having difficulties of segregating what is good, what is bad. So that's why I want to give you a little bit of insight for which perks you should look for, and maybe for which builds you should be looking those perks to be used for, so you can have a better idea. Starting with the Lifestealer's Draw, as we can see, all the hits will gain 15% lifesteal, and the power of lifesteal is increased by 15% as long as you have not used a survival potion in the last 13 seconds. Now, survival potions are many, but as we know, most of them, if not all of them, are providing HP on use. This perk, I believe, is a must when it comes to PvE, because if you play PvE, you are not aiming to drink too many potions, simply because you should be stepping on the sacred ground of your healer. The same logic can be applied for PvP when you have a pocket healer, but of course this requires an extra person healing you, so this means that you basically are playing 2 for 1. If you have that pocket healer with you, definitely Lifestealer's Draw is one of the best choices. But if you don't have, maybe reconsider it, because in PvP, in drastic change to PvE, we are using quite a lot of potions. Now, the next perk is Sacrificial Empowerment, which the status of that perk is that it gives you 1.5% base damage, but the armor is decreased by 1% when you drop under 50% HP, and this of course can be stacked up to 5 times. It's not mentioned here, but you can stack it 5 times. Lifestealer's Draw, by the way, cannot be stacked. So Sacrificial Empowerment is probably, in my opinion, the best perk when it comes to Season 10 patch, simply because it gives you up to 7.5% base damage, and the base damage is something that you cannot acquire in New World so easily. A lot of empowers can be acquired extremely quick with the help of weapons such as the Void Gauntlet or the Sword and Shield, and the cap of empower is 50%, but there is no cap for base damage, and there is so little chances that you can acquire it that I think that everyone should aim to get every single possibility of base damage. In my opinion, Sacrificial Empowerment is indeed the best perk when it comes to gear pieces of armor. So if you have the chance to have this perk, definitely try to see if the other perks are also nice on the armor piece and use it. Then the next one is Terminal Vengeance. Terminal Vengeance gives you 5% increased base damage, which is even higher than the Sacrificial Empowerment. But the problem here is that for every 25% of your max HP, when this is like missing, then you get the 5% increased damage, which technically means that we have an optimal base damage increase of 5 or maybe 10% when we are under 75 or under 50% HP. Now, as you can imagine, for most classes, let's assume melee class. If you are a melee player and you are under 75% HP, that's pretty much a good thing. You can still do it. You can still fight out there. But if you are already under 50% HP, especially in this patch when the damage is so high, I think that you are risking to get one-shotted after that threshold, and I'm not really sure if it's worth it for such player. When it comes to ranged player, probably it's doable for the 5% increase, because dropping under 75 doesn't put you in that much of a problem, that much of a risk. But still, I would kind of consider a different approach to this perk or something else that can replace it, simply to have something more concrete and something more stable than just having to lose quarter of my life just so I can get a little bit of damage. But I will leave it up to you to choose. I would personally slot this on B tier, not really going above that, but for some builds it could be a little bit higher, but definitely not on the S tier like we used to call it. Okay, the next one is called Prolonged Favor, and this one will give you increase the duration of limited duration buffs on ourself by 10%. This one is also stackable, it's not mentioned here, but I believe that you already know, and if you don't know, I will of course let you know. The buffs on ourselves, the limited duration buffs on ourselves, are those who are applying Empower, Fortify, and Speed. Those are the buffs on ourselves. Now, of course, for Speed, Fortify, and Empower, we can already get quite a lot of abilities that are boosting our numbers there, but having the duration of those abilities and buffs to be longer is something really nice. Especially, for example, in PvE, every single DPS player wants to have the Empower for as long as possible. So if you are aiming to have a really nice Empower or a really nice Fortify, but your buffs that are giving those bonuses are not so long in time, let's say that the bonus duration is just around 4 or 5 seconds, maybe it's a good idea to look for this perk. However, if I need to choose between this one or Sacrificial Empowerment, for example, I would probably take the Sacrificial Empowerment and I will skip the Prolonged Favor. Going to the next one, we have the Freeing Aggression, and this one is giving hitting a target will reduce the duration of active crowd control status effect on self by 5%. Now, again, in order to understand what is a status crowd control in New World, status crowd control is stun, slow, and root. Now, as we can imagine, if we are stunned, there is no chance of us hitting someone simply because we are in a stun. We cannot do anything. If we are slowed, then there is definitely a possibility for us to hit someone and reduce the duration of it. And then, of course, if we are rooted and the person is still next to us, we can definitely hit him. However, I think that this perk is not really useful simply because you can just run Freedom, which is giving you an 8% um, basically reduction of all crowd control status effects, and therefore you're just gonna get higher value for a single slot of a perk. It's always there. It doesn't ask you to hit someone. So I think that those 5% are really not something worth it to put a full slot on your armor. The next perk on the list is the new Quick Revive perk, which in my opinion is somewhat of a joke, but of course maybe some people will find use for it. It gives you grit while reviving and reduces the time required to revive down players or to be revived while down by 40%. Now, if we speak PvP, there is only one place where you can revive people, and this is open world fights, because in any mode like capture the flag, arena, wars, OPRs, everyone, when he gets killed, he instantly dies. There is no such thing as down state, right? But if we speak about PvE and we speak about dungeons, raids, and so on, then of course you can maybe find some use for that perk. Now, of course, in my opinion, this perk probably will go into the list of the healers, because usually they're the ones reviving people. And of course, if they feel like they have an extra slot for this one, you can definitely use it. But as you can see here, it's only usable on helmet. I forgot to mention that, but here you can see where you can use those perks. So this is a helmet perk, and yeah, if you really think that your party is gonna need that perk, maybe you can go for it. The next one is Purifying Switch, and this one is with a really interesting idea, but I think that the numbers are not quite there. Maybe the buffs are not enough, but hitting a target with an ability, within 5 seconds after switching your weapons will cleanse one debuff. Now, hitting with an ability is already a requirement, and then also being only one debuff when we have like quite a lot of stuff going on in New World, I think it's not really there. But if we had, for example, 2 debuffs with the same effect of every 5 seconds, I think it would have been way better. However, in some builds, depending on what you are running, maybe you can go with this perk simply because they're weapons who have really low cooldowns, and this means that you can switch between them really quickly and therefore get the maximum value of this perk. But still, I would not really recommend to go with this perk if you already, of course, don't have the others. Maybe you can try something, but the others are definitely more worth it. And then we have Breaker's Bypass, which is the last one on the list from the new perks. When attacking is blocked, gain a stack of 4% stamina damage increase for 4 seconds. Now, to give you a perception of that, if there is a sword and shoot player and he's blocking your attacks and you are trying to break his block with your basic attacks of a fire staff, bow player, or a musket, it will take you quite some time to do that. And it's really annoying because you literally feel like powerless. You just cannot do anything. So I think that this perk was meant for those cases. And of course, it can stack up to 10 times, which can be quite strong. But of course, 10 blocking attacks is also quite a lot. So I think that this perk is really niche. Maybe it's meant to be used against those builds that are extremely annoying, like full tank builds in arenas that are just trying to survive until the end and so on. But in general, I think that it can have some kind of a use. But if we speak about the overall usefulness, I would probably place it somewhere in the middle of the pack. Not something to write a book about, but it is probably worth it for such cases, like arenas, full tanks, something like this, something in those lines. Okay, so those are the new perks from the new season. And as I said, those we cannot control. We cannot place them on the items. We cannot replace them if they are already there, which means that if we get a drop and one of those perks is on them, which most likely will be the case, we need to decide for ourselves if the perk is worth it or if it's not. If we decide that the perk is worth it, then the next step is to look at the other perks. And of course, the other perks can be 3 different types. As we saw here, there is types of skills. There is defensive types, which are the defensive charms. And then we have offensive charms. Now, in almost all previous seasons, my personal belief that weapon perks should not be slotted on the weapon was the case, because if you used before a weapon perk on your weapon, basically you are losing the potential of slotting damaging perks, and this hurts your damage output. Now in this season, we have a really drastic change, which allows us to put offensive perks on our armor pieces. And now we can slot, for example, from this tier list that I have here. It's not a tier list, but it's like all the perks for season 10. We can see that, for example, keenly fortified, enchanted, skill enchanted, vicious, keen, vorpal, rogue, penetrating, backstab, headshot, keenly jacked, like all of those perks, which were previously weapon perks, now can be slotted on gear. And this kind of flips the table because we want to have our weapon perks on our weapons now because they would get higher value when it comes to an ability. If I go here and I open one new tab just to show you. So if we go for spike, or let's say empowered spike is the full name. If I go for empowered spike, we can see that if we place it on the gear, anywhere on the gear, the empowered spike will do 15% more damage to rooted targets and 10% to slowed ones. But if I use it on my ice gauntlet, I would get 24% more damage to rooted targets and 16% to ones that are slowed. This means that if I want to use a specific items with specific perks for their skills, ideally you want to have the perks on your weapon. It's way stronger, it's way more efficient, and at the same time you would not lose damage simply because, like I said, you can slot all those aggressive perks like the vicious, the keen, enchanted, skill enchantment, and so on your armor pieces, on your jewelry pieces. Of course, you can also slot them on your weapon pieces, but then it's not really efficient to put them on the weapons because you are limiting yourself to not have that many, skill perks there, let's say. So that's why I think that if we are speaking about offensive charms are something really important. And if we go for damage dealing builds, for example, fire staff or bow or a musket, those perks have the highest priority there. Now, of course, if you are running, for example, a bow or a musket, ideally you want to have enchanted, because enchanted will increase. Let me just find the charm, because we also still have the old values, which are definitely not correct anymore. So we have the enchanted charm, which will give you light and heavy attacks, will deal 2.3% damage increase, which is really nice. But then if we are playing, for example, fire staff or something with abilities, or let's say we play bleed rapier, then we want to go for skilled enchantment, because this one will increase the damage of our skills. So as you can imagine, with the amount of charms that we have out there, and there are indeed a lot, there is one for bleed, one for weaken, one for disease, there is so many of them. Ideally, I think that the best ones are those who are impacting your damage directly. And of course, you just need to focus on what do you need. Do you need hits or do you need abilities and critical hits? Because it's two different things. If you play with hits, like I said, musket or a hatchet or a spear, maybe even, you don't really need the skill enchantment. Yes, you might get a little bit more damage on your Pharaoh Rush, for example, or maybe on your Perforate, but ideally those builds are hitting a lot of basic attacks, and then Enchanted and Rogue are probably the way to go. Of course, Rogue, I think it doesn't work on ranged, but this season can surprise us quite a lot. And then if we speak about mages or someone who is using abilities, then skill enchantment on top of vicious, for example, is also super nice. If you want to have even more critical chances, you can even go with keen and so on. So those perks, in my opinion, are having a priority over anything else. So make sure to have some of them, to have slot for them, basically, because you can have them or you can slot them, but you just need the offensive slot. Now, of course, if we do play DPS, we want to have more than one DPS slot. And one other extremely good perk, which was also a thing in the past, this was basically the only offensive perk on the armor pieces, if we have to be honest, is the harnessing. Now, harnessing is giving you straight up 3% boost to damage, and this is counting towards the empower cap. So if you have 5 harnessings, it would mean that you have 15% of empower. This will boost all of your damage, all of your outgoing damage from this type. So if I'm playing, for example, Void Gauntlet, as you can see, the Void Harnessing, it will give me 3% bonus damage, and it would not matter if I'm doing basic attacks, if I'm doing abilities or whatever. So this is something extremely, extremely important. And even And even so, those are giving damage to the heart runes as well. So if you have a heart rune that deals the same type of damage, for example, you use the cannon blast is doing strike damage. So if you have strike harnessing, you would benefit your cannon blast as well. So those perks, if we speak about offensive perks, those are the 3 or 4 ones that you should be looking for. In total, I can summarize them here. Those are the enchanted, the skilled enchantment, the vicious, and probably rogue or penetrating backstab in some cases, because penetrating backstab is only PvP. You cannot use it in PvE. If we want to make some crazy builds with more bleeding effects, with more disease, with more slows and things like this, it's still a possibility for you to go for those. But in my opinion, the raw damage is always the better choice, because there is a lot of counters to disease. There is a lot of counters to rents and things like this, but I will not go into further details about that because it's a completely different topic. So then we have the fixed perks, we had the offensive charms. Now we have to discuss the defensive ones. If we assume that we have an item with 5 open slots, I don't know if here it's shown, but we usually have 5 different perks. Yeah, there we go. So we have 1 fixed that drops, or we get a lucky roll. Then we have 2 offensive ones, and then you are left with 2 remaining places that you can slot stuff. Like I said, in my opinion, you should avoid having skill slots on your armor pieces. The reason is because you will be having the skills on your weapons to get the maximum value out of them. Of course, if you still want to have a skill in your armor, feel free to go for it. I cannot really tell you what to do, of course. But for the last 2, I personally would aim to have defensive ones. And in those cases, again, it would depend what are you playing, what is your equip load, are you playing in light gear, are you playing in heavy gear. So if I have to be honest, I think that Enchanted Ward is probably not the best perk anymore. Before it was definitely a must and everyone was running it, but now Enchanted Ward, as I said, lost a little bit of value. And if we check the 2 differences, this is the old one with a 3.5% reduction to light and heavy attacks. Actually, it was 4, but they reduced it to 3.5 now for some reason. And this is the new one. The new one gives you only 2%. So for most people, it would still be a thing just because the name was so popular of the perk. But I think that it's kind of losing its value. And I think that if we go, for example, for wellness, which is really strange, by the way, but wellness giving you 2% max HP, plus we have a bit of a higher HP right now than before, this value of health might be more worth it than the 2% of light and heavy attacks reduction of damage. So this is one of the things that I probably will consider building on, and I will see if it's gonna work. And then for another, let's say, really good defensive perk, you can go for Shirking Fortification, which is boosted really a lot. In the previous patch, it was giving 5.3. Here it says 4.5, but it was 5.3. And now it's giving 9% fortification, which, as you can imagine, for medium players and for heavy players, this is a huge boost. Of course, for light is still a debate if it's worth it or not. It has to be tested extendedly just to see if the value is worth it. But definitely this perk for medium and heavy is probably the best right now, because the value of so much fortification is staggering. Like there is so much damage mitigation when you have so much fortify. It's just too good. And then, of course, we should never forget the conditionings. So we have quite a lot of conditioning perks. As you can see, they even added new ones. Before we didn't have the lightning, the arcane, and I believe one we didn't have, or maybe they added them, I don't know. But we basically had like mostly usable ones were the fire, the slash, and the trust. And now we have the whole spectrum. We have all of those conditionings that you can go for. And of course, they are mitigating the damage directly, as all of them have the same description. I will just go with the nature one. Nature absorption damage for 5 seconds after taking nature damage. So 5% nature damage absorption, which means if somebody does 1,000 damage to you, you will basically absorb 50 as long as you receive the same type of damage just before that. This perk don't have a cooldown. This is also something that we should mention, because there is no cooldown to this. There is nothing that can stop it to proc non-stop, and therefore to get the maximum value. You can have it everywhere. As you can see under, it says compatible to kite shields, to round shields, to tower shields, and all the pieces of armor. And of course, each item with this perk also stacks, which means if you go 5 conditionings to one type, let's say slash, you would get the 25% slash protection or mitigation of damage when you get hit by slash damage. So those, in my opinion, are also extremely, extremely nice perks. Now, of course, you can go also with other perks like freedom, like I've mentioned earlier. Freedom is a really good perk. It gives you, actually, I don't know why I was probably watching the old one that gives 8%, but the freedom now gives 15% of reduction to slow, stun, and root. And this is a flat mitigation of your, status effects on you. Now, if we compare the freedom to the freeing aggression giving you 5% with 1 second cooldown on each and every hit means that, first of all, you have to hit a target. Second, it has to be like in between 1 second. And you need to hit 3 times in order to reduce your status effect. This is basically like for the time that you're gonna hit someone 3 times, your status effect will be already over. I can tell you this. So I really don't see like what is the point of running this perk. Like this for me is a completely dead perk. I will probably run quick revive instead of freeing aggression, to be fair. I just really don't see why would anyone prefer to go with it. But anyway, freedom, one really, really good perk, especially for the frontliners, like the bruisers. They definitely need that so they don't get rooted in place or they get slowed too much. And as you can imagine, if you stack 4 or 5 of them, I think they removed the limit because before it was 4. Now I think you can go for 5. And one thing that instantly popped into my head when I was thinking about it, if I have 5 freedoms, that would be 75%. And then if I use the freedom pants, which also have a freedom with 12% here, like, what are we doing? Are we unstoppable now? Can we consider ourselves unstoppable? But yeah, actually this one has 20%. So we're going to be at 95% freedom, which is ridiculous. But anyway, this is one thing to think about if you want to go and test it out. And then we have Invigorated. Invigorated is another amazing defensive perk, which again has a value of 15%, but it has this time effect towards weaken, disease, and exhaust. And I think that this is definitely not a surprise to anyone right now because last season the Jin head wrap build was really, really popular. I think that this build will remain extremely strong simply because it mitigates all of the debuffs on you, all of the rents and diseases, and basically it makes you almost like impossible to kill, especially if you are running a good defensive weapons and you are, let's say, in medium gear. So this is another amazing perk to look for. Then we have Vigor, which is not really my personal favorite. I never liked the Vigor idea simply because there is not that many dot builds. Usually the game is, I would say for the most part, it was always focused on direct damage, meaning burst damage, and then you want to just kill people as quickly as possible. The dots are the contrary to that. They are doing a lot of damage, but over time. And if we speak about group fights, if we speak about potions and things like this, those dots sometimes, not always of course, but sometimes they lose their value. They don't really do their job, and then eventually someone gets healed, or someone will drink a potion, or someone will cleanse completely all of the dots, and therefore you would basically lose the value of the dots. But if you think that you can have like difficult times against dot players, then definitely Vigor can be for you. And then, of course, if we go back to the list, we have quite a lot of other ones that I can just quickly mention here, but you can also see the values on the other side. So we have the physical and the elemental versions, which are, I would say, mediocre perks. I would definitely not really prioritize them because they only protect you from a single type of a damage, and it's not even the full range of that damage. For example, the physical will be only from physical ranged attacks, but what if they are magical ranged attacks, right? And then the elemental is exactly for that, but it would not protect you from abilities. So I don't know. I feel like those two perks are just missing the mark. They are not really there. Hasted Vigor remains a pretty decent choice in my opinion. It removes a little bit the dot effects on you, which is not the important part, but the more important part is whenever you have a dot on you, you will get 9% haste, and this has a 5 seconds cooldown. I think 5 seconds duration, sorry. So basically, anytime you have a dot on you, you would basically have almost 10% haste, which is amazing. And of course, there is way too many dots that are small ones, but just to proc the effect, it's really nice. We already spoke about Freedom, Vigor, and Invigorated. Then we have Shirking Heals, something that we actually missed to mention, but Shirking Heals is an amazing perk And now it's not only slottable on your armor pieces, but it can also go on your jewelries and even your weapons. And if you really want to run a Shirking Hero set, you can definitely do it. You are pretty free to do it because you have a lot of variety of options that you can put it on. And I think that this build still can be decent as long as you know how to run it. And of course, you dodge the necessary attacks. It got nerfed a little bit, but still the perk remains really good. And then we have a couple of other perks which are quite situational in really niche builds. So, for example, the Alchemist Reprieve giving you increased power of potions. If you stack those and then you have, for example, Endless Thirst, your potions are not potions anymore. They are pretty much barrels of HP. It's like a barrel full of HP. They will give you so much HP, it's insane. But of course, you need to invest heavily into technically 5 perks and an artifact. If we go for Anointed Lifesteal, it's almost the same thing. You can reach extreme amounts of lifesteal together with other items like the Blood Drinker, the Lifestealer's Drove perk, and so on. But then again, you are investing heavily into lifesteal. You are becoming a vampire, but is it really worth it? So this is actually the beauty of season 10 because we have so many things that can be a variety to something else before. We also have the Grit Ward, which is pretty much same as Enchanted Ward, but this time it's covering all the types of damage. So it's not only light and heavy attacks, but the requirement is of course to have Grit, which means that it's mostly usable for frontline bruisers, not for mages, not for musket players, for example. Potent Vivacity and Potent Energy, I think that they are not really usable perks. Um, I can go into details when you're gonna have those effects, but they are so niche that I think that those are just not that great of a choice. We already spoke about Wellness being possibly the replacement of Enchanted Ward if we want to just have raw HP. I believe that it's definitely a good choice. And then we have the Harnessing and Conditioning alongside with Shirking Fortification. We have the Tourney Reflection, which is an interesting perk, I would say, but it's a bit strange in my opinion. Whenever you get hit, the target that is hitting you would get back 8% of your weapon damage, and they will have a reduced critical chance. Now, I'm not really sure if that's a worth it to have perk, but if you want to give it a try, maybe slot one and see what's happening. Then we still have the Critical Retribution, which is also a really horrible perk for me. That basically gives you critical chance whenever you get critted. So if someone crits you, now you have 10% critical chance. I just think that this is not really worth it. And then of course we have the Sturdy Energy, which is mainly for blocking. The Vital Synergy, which remains one of the best perks probably for chest pieces, especially for medium and heavy players, because you would get more stamina regeneration while you are below 50% HP. And here I put vice versa, meaning if you are under 50% stamina, you would get under 50% stamina, you're gonna get 15% more incoming healings, like from potions, from heals, from healers, from shirking heals, for example, and so on. Then we have Empowering Breaker, which unfortunately remained not so usable perk. When you are hitting blocking targets, you just get Empower, but the thing is, you are getting the Empower, but your attacks are blocked, so the damage doesn't go anywhere. You still see 0 on the bar, so I don't know. And then, of course, Shirking Energy, which is a really nice perk, especially for light players. But now in this season, we saw a small change where they also added the possibility for mediums to have that perk and to get the benefit from it, because it was only labeled to be for light players. Now it's also for light and medium, which is a boost basically. And then we have, of course, Hardcore Parkour, but we are not parkouring too much here, so I don't know if anyone is having a use of that perk. And then we have all the new perks that we already spoke about. I'm really sorry for those of you who like dark mode. That's why I changed from the sheet, so you don't get your eyes burned. But that's in general, guys, what I think. If I have to summarize it for the TLDR, if you want to have the perfect piece on your gear, and if you are a DPS, I would go for Sacrificial Empowerment on first place. Then I would want to have a decent defensive perk as a second. That could be a Conditioning or something else that would give me a decent defense. Then I would want to have either a gem socket or 3 offensive perks. But if you go for no sockets on your armor pieces, try to avoid having like a full armor set without the gem socket. The gems are amazing tool for defense. I didn't really mention them as a perk slot, but they are a perk slot. And if you don't have too many gems, you would suffer a lot. You can maybe skip one or two at best, but try to have some gems. And then, of course, for the last two perks, in order to see what I'm talking about, so we have Sacrificial Empowerment. We have, let's say, one more defensive slot in the form of, let's say, Flame Conditioning or something else that can defend us. Then I would want to have a gem slot. And then I would want to have, oh, it went really bad. And then I would want to have two offensive perks, which can be, for example, Skilled Enchantment or Vicious if I'm a mage, or it could be Enchanted and let's say Rogue if I'm a DPS player on melee, like a Spear guy or a Hatchet guy, and so on. Like, it all depends on your choices. And yeah, there we go. We are back to it. And like I said, if you want, you can drop the gem perk, like you can drop the gem socket, but then you would have 3 offensive ones, 2 defensive ones, but you would not have the protection from the gem. And if you do that way too many times, you would be missing quite a lot of resistance, and then you would be extremely, extremely susceptible to damage. So I think we went really long on this one. Hopefully some people would have the patience. I will make sure to have timestamps on this. And for the next one, we will be discussing the jewelry pieces. There is not so much to be said there, because now you know also the basics on how the perks actually work, how we obtain some of them, and how we change some of them, meaning the charms. And you would already have also the idea for the skill slots, like why we want all of the skills to be on our weapons and not on our gear. So I believe that the future videos will be a bit more summarized and a bit more, quicker to explain. So thank you for watching. As always, if you want to see more stuff about New World and all the potential builds that are coming soon, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I will catch you guys on the next one.